A simple black woman was kicked out of car dealership. 24 hours later, her billionaire husband's Rolls-Royce Phantom arrives. Sophie, in a simple outfit, walks into a high-end car dealership, eager to explore their luxury options. However, the sales manager, Ethan, immediately dismisses her with a condescending look, assuming she's just another bargain hunter who couldn't possibly afford their exclusive vehicles. Before Sophie can leave, another saleswoman, Olivia, approaches her with a friendly smile, offering to show her the car she was inquiring about. Sophie, feeling relieved by the kindness, agrees. Olivia takes her on a quick tour of the model and answers her questions, showing genuine interest and professionalism. Sophie thanks Olivia for her patience and leaves, though still humiliated by Ethan's earlier behavior. The next day, she arrived with her husband in a Phantom Rolls-Royce, and everyone froze in deep shock. It was a calm morning in Texas when Sophie stepped through the doors of the high-end car dealership, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and nerves. Dressed in a casual yet elegant outfit, well-fitted jeans and a simple white t-shirt, she felt ready to take her first step into a world of luxury she had always dreamed about. The dealership was a masterpiece of modern design, with sleek floors and glass walls that reflected the gleaming luxury vehicles on display. Each car was a work of art, from the glistening chrome to the perfectly tailored curves of the bodies. Sophie's eyes danced from one stunning model to the next, her imagination running wild as she imagined herself behind the wheel of one of these magnificent machines. As she walked deeper into the showroom, Sophie's sense of awe was met with a wave of excitement. She had saved for years, and today was supposed to be the start of something new, something she could be proud of. She made her way to the black sedan, its polished surface reflecting the light in an almost hypnotic way. She ran a finger along its smooth exterior, admiring its craftsmanship, when suddenly, a voice broke her reverie. "Can I help you with something?" The voice was smooth, almost too smooth. Sophie turned to see a man standing nearby. He was well-dressed in a suit that could only be described as impeccably tailored. His name tag read Ethan, and his posture screamed authority, as though he owned the place, or at least believed he did. Sophie smiled politely, gathering her thoughts. "Yes, I was just looking at the sedan. I'm thinking about purchasing a new car, something luxurious, but also practical." Ethan glanced her over quickly, his eyes narrowing slightly. His polite expression seemed rehearsed, almost mechanical, as though he had memorized the perfect customer service script. But there was something in the way he looked at her, something that immediately struck Sophie as wrong. She didn't know why, but it felt like he was judging her, sizing her up in a way that made her skin prickle uncomfortably. "This model?" Ethan asked, his tone too measured. He raised an eyebrow, clearly unsure about her presence in the showroom. He didn't wait for her response before continuing. "I'm afraid this is more of a specialty place for, well, those with very specific tastes. Our vehicles start at $900,000. He paused, a faint, condescending smile curling at the corners of his mouth. "I'm not sure you're in the right place." Sophie's stomach dropped. His words weren't loud, but the implication was clear. In that brief moment, she felt the weight of his judgment. He was dismissing her, assuming that she couldn't possibly afford such a high-end vehicle because of the simplicity of her outfit. Her face flushed, a surge of humiliation rising from the pit of her stomach, but she forced herself to stay composed. She didn't want to let him see how much his words stung. "Thank you, but I think I'll just look around," Sophie managed, keeping her voice steady despite the bitterness that welled up inside her. Ethan gave a tight, polite nod and turned away, already looking past her to another customer who had just entered. The brief encounter had left Sophie feeling small, and she could feel the eyes of the staff and other customers subtly shifting toward her, their gazes almost too sharp, too judgmental. She stood for a moment, still processing what had just happened. Her excitement had deflated in an instant, and now she felt like an intruder in a world she had no business being a part of. Trying to shake off the uncomfortable feeling, Sophie turned to leave. She had come in hoping for a dream, but she was leaving with nothing but a bruised sense of self-worth. Just as she stepped toward the door, she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. She turned around to find another woman standing there, a junior saleswoman with a warm, welcoming smile. Her name tag read Olivia. "I'm sorry about Ethan," Olivia said, her voice filled with warmth. He can be a bit much. But I'd be happy to show you around, if you're still interested. I've actually got a lot of details on that sedan you were looking at." Sophie, surprised by the sudden shift in tone, felt a wave of relief wash over her. Olivia's kindness felt like a breath of fresh air after the cold, judgmental encounter with Ethan. "That would be wonderful," Sophie replied, a soft smile forming on her lips as she followed Olivia back toward the car. The atmosphere shifted as they walked. Olivia spoke with enthusiasm about the sedan's features, the advanced technology, the leather interior, the incredible performance. Sophie found herself listening intently, the discomfort of the previous encounter slowly fading as Olivia's genuine interest and passion for the car took over. She could tell that Olivia was truly invested in helping her, not just trying to make a sale. As they finished their brief tour, Sophie felt a genuine sense of gratitude toward Olivia. It wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about being treated with respect and kindness, despite how she looked or what Ethan had assumed about her. "Thank you, Olivia," Sophie said, her voice filled with appreciation. "I really appreciate your time and kindness. It means a lot." Olivia smiled back, her warmth filling the space between them. "Of course. I really hope you find the right car for you." Sophie nodded and made her way toward the exit, still processing the events of the day. The earlier sting of Ethan's judgment hadn't disappeared, but it had softened. The encounter with Olivia had reminded her that not everyone shared the same narrow view of the world. It was a small moment of validation, one that made her feel a little less invisible. As she stepped out into the sunlight, Sophie felt a mix of emotions, gratitude, but also a lingering sense of discomfort from how she had been treated earlier. But one thing was clear: she would not let the actions of one person define her worth. Sophie walked through the door of their home, her mind still reeling from the encounter at the dealership. She set her purse down on the kitchen counter with a soft thud, her eyes unfocused as she tried to shake off the humiliation that had clung to her like a shadow. Ryan, her husband, looked up from his desk as she entered, a warm smile spreading across his face. But as soon as he saw the expression on Sophie's face, the smile faded. "Sophie, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking in a deep breath. The pain of the day rushed back to her, and she felt it all over again. The sting of Ethan's words, the way he judged her without a second thought. Sophie let out a shaky sigh as she sank onto the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. It's nothing," Sophie started, but she couldn't bring herself to pretend everything was fine. "I went to the dealership today. I was hoping to see a car, maybe find something for myself." Ryan nodded, his expression softening as he sat beside her. "What happened?" Sophie's gaze dropped to her hands, her fingers trembling slightly as she spoke. "I was looking at this beautiful sedan. I wasn't planning to buy anything yet, but I thought I'd ask a few questions. The sales manager, Ethan, Sophie paused, swallowing hard. The words felt like they were stuck in her throat. "He just looked me up and down, like I didn't belong there. He assumed I couldn't afford the car just because of what I was wearing. He dismissed me without even listening to what I had to say." Sophie's voice cracked, the hurt of the moment rising up again. "He told me the cars start at $900,000 like I was some kind of imposter, and then just waved me off. Like I wasn't even worth his time." Ryan's jaw tightened as he listened, his brows furrowed in disbelief. Sophie looked up at him, her eyes brimming with frustration and pain. "I felt so small, Ryan. I felt humiliated. And what's worse is that I felt like I didn't even have the right to be there. All because of what I was wearing." Ryan's face turned a shade darker, his fists clenching as his anger began to simmer beneath the surface. He leaned forward, his gaze steady on Sophie's. "That's unacceptable, Sophie. No one should ever make you feel like that. Not just because of what you wear, but because of who you are. You deserve respect, and they had no right to treat you that way." Sophie gave a faint, grateful smile, but her shoulders still felt heavy, weighed down by the memory of the rejection. "I know, but I just don't know how to get past it. I thought I could handle it, but it's been eating at me all day." Ryan reached over and gently squeezed her hand, his touch grounding her in the moment. "You don't have to handle it alone, Sophie. This isn't just about a car. This is about respect. And no one should treat you like that, not in any situation. I'm going to make sure no one ever does again." Sophie looked at Ryan, surprised by the intensity in his voice. She could see the fire burning behind his eyes, the determination taking hold. Ryan had always been calm, collected, and level-headed, but she could tell that this was different. He was angry, and it wasn't just because someone had been rude to his wife. It was because he could see how much it had hurt her, how much it had affected her. I'm calling a few people tomorrow, Ryan continued, his tone now steely with resolve. I'm going to make sure they understand what happened and that no one is ever treated like you were. Ethan's behavior is not acceptable, and I'm going to hold them accountable for it. Sophie felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had known Ryan would stand by her, but hearing his words, seeing the fire in his eyes, made her feel a little less alone in the situation. She could feel the weight of the humiliation slowly lifting, knowing that her husband would take action. Thank you, Sophie whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. Ryan looked at her, his expression softening as he gently brushed a lock of hair from her face. You don't have to thank me. I'm doing this because it's right. And because you're worth fighting for. Sophie felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, a sense of reassurance that soothed the ache that had been gnawing at her all day. As Ryan stood up, his determination clear in his posture, Sophie watched him make his way to the phone. He immediately began dialing numbers, his focus unwavering. Sophie sat back, her heart swelling with a sense of quiet strength. The humiliation she had felt earlier hadn't disappeared, but it was starting to fade, replaced by a growing sense of determination. With Ryan by her side, she knew that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something much more important. A change was coming, and she would be there, standing tall, alongside the man who promised to make sure no one ever made her feel small again. The morning air was cool, but the sun was already high, casting a golden glow over the sleek Rolls-Royce Phantom that rolled into the dealership parking lot. The car seemed to gleam in the sunlight, its polished chrome exterior reflecting the surroundings in sharp, glittering detail. Ryan's grip on the wheel was steady, his mind focused on the task ahead, while Sophie sat quietly beside him, her thoughts swirling. There was an unsettling calm about her, a quiet resolve that had taken root since the previous day. Today wasn't about proving herself, it was about justice. As the Rolls-Royce Phantom came to a smooth stop, Sophie glanced at the dealership ahead. The same building that had dismissed her so callously yesterday now seemed like the stage for a much-needed confrontation. Her breath was steady, but inside, she felt a spark of excitement. Today, things would be different. Ryan turned off the engine, and Sophie could hear the satisfying hum of the car's power. She adjusted the collar of her designer coat, the rich fabric a far cry from the casual white t-shirt and jeans she had worn the day before. Today, she was dressed in a royal, sophisticated outfit, tailored, elegant, and absolutely striking. The transformation was deliberate. Sophie was no longer the woman who had been looked down upon for her appearance. She was someone entirely different now, someone who commanded respect. As the car doors opened and the cool air rushed in, Sophie stepped out, the heels of her polished shoes clicking against the pavement with a confidence that turned heads. Inside the dealership, the usual hum of activity came to a sudden halt. Staff members froze mid-conversation, their gazes snapping toward the entrance. There was a collective pause as the realization hit them like a wave. Sophie. The woman they had dismissed the day before was back, but this time, she was not the same person they had thought her to be. The contrast between her casual look from the day before and her current appearance in designer clothes was striking. Eyes widened, whispers fluttered through the air, and every staff member seemed to recognize that they had misjudged her. The shift in energy was palpable, the tension in the air growing thicker by the second. Sophie could feel their eyes on her, but this time, the gaze didn't hold judgment. It held something else, something akin to surprise. Ryan stepped forward first, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the showroom. There was no hesitation in his stride, no wavering in his posture. He was focused, his every step exuding authority as he made his way straight toward the back offices. Sophie followed quietly behind him, her movements measured, but her resolve unwavering. She was no longer the woman who had been hurt yesterday. Today, she was the one in control. As they approached Ethan's office, the dealership staff watched with a mix of curiosity and unease. They knew who Ryan was. A successful entrepreneur, a man who didn't need to prove his worth to anyone. But it wasn't just Ryan's presence that had them on edge, it was Sophie. The woman who had been dismissed by one of their own was now walking through their doors with the kind of quiet power that sent a message louder than any words could. Ryan didn't knock. He simply opened the door, his sharp gaze falling on Ethan, who was sitting behind his desk, going through paperwork. The air in the room shifted as Ethan looked up, his eyes immediately narrowing in recognition. "Mr. Parker," Ethan stammered, clearly caught off guard. "What can I do for you today?" Ryan didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You can start by explaining how you treated my wife yesterday," he said, his voice low but commanding. The words hung heavy in the air, and Ethan immediately began to shift uncomfortably in his seat. Sophie stood beside Ryan, her face calm but resolute. She could feel the tension between her and Ethan as they locked eyes. Yesterday, he had dismissed her. Today, she was here to make sure he understood the consequences of his actions. Ryan continued, his tone colder now. "You assumed that because of my wife's appearance, she didn't belong in this dealership. You made a judgment based solely on her clothes and treated her with utter disrespect. That's unacceptable." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in the room. "Tell me, Ethan, how do you explain that?" Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was clearly caught off guard by the sudden shift in the situation. Yesterday, he had looked at Sophie with disdain, but now, with Ryan standing there and Sophie by his side, his confidence faltered. He shifted in his seat, sweating slightly as he tried to come up with a response, but nothing that came to mind seemed adequate. Sophie could see the panic rising in his eyes, his bravado slipping away. Sophie stepped forward, her voice calm but cutting. "I came in here yesterday hoping to be treated with respect, to inquire about a car, just like anyone else. But you saw me, judged me, and dismissed me without even asking. That's not just rude, it's discriminatory." Her gaze was unflinching, her words deliberate. "I want to make sure no one else experiences what I did here yesterday." The silence in the room was deafening. Ethan's face reddened, the realization sinking in. This wasn't just a misstep, it was a moment that could cost him everything. Sophie's eyes were unwavering as she met his gaze. Ryan looked back at Ethan, his expression darkening with an intensity that made it clear he would not back down. "You've embarrassed my wife, and in doing so, you've disrespected me as well. I'm not going to let this slide." Ethan's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, his mind scrambling for some form of damage control. I never meant," he started, but Ryan cut him off. "No, it doesn't matter what you meant. What matters is how you treated her, how you made her feel." Ryan's voice was quiet but filled with finality. "And how you're going to make things right." Sophie's words, spoken with clarity and authority, had already made the point. Ethan was on the edge. He could feel the ground shifting beneath him. He had just learned a hard lesson, one he would not soon forget. The tension in the air was thick, the finality of Ryan's words hanging like a sword over Ethan's head. Sophie stood still, her posture straight, and as she looked around the room, she saw the staff's expressions shift. They no longer saw her as the woman to dismiss. They saw her as someone who demanded respect, and someone who had just earned it. As the scene unfolded, Sophie realized that this moment wasn't just about a car. It was about standing up for herself, for what she deserved. And as she stood there, calm and composed, she felt a deep sense of empowerment that she hadn't expected. But it was a feeling she would carry with her from that day forward. The atmosphere inside the dealership had shifted dramatically in the wake of Ethan's firing. The usual hum of voices and the clatter of keys and paperwork had been replaced with an uneasy silence, the kind that hangs in the air when something important has just happened. The staff moved around with a sense of restraint, their movement slow, their eyes occasionally darting towards Sophie and Ryan, as if unsure how to proceed. It was as though the building itself had absorbed the weight of the events that had transpired, events that would not be easily forgotten. Sophie stood quietly, her posture still calm but now accompanied by a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had been here before, in this place of discomfort, where she was judged unfairly, where people made assumptions about her based on her appearance. But today, she was no longer the woman she was yesterday. She had come to the dealership with a purpose, and that purpose had been fulfilled, not just for her, but for every other person who had ever been made to feel small or insignificant. Ryan stood beside her, his presence a constant source of support. His jaw was still set, his eyes hard, but there was a flicker of something else behind his gaze, pride. Not in the confrontation, but in the fact that Sophie had held her ground and had shown a strength that went beyond words. He had watched her transform over the past day, from the woman who had been hurt to the woman who now radiated quiet strength. It was a transformation that was as striking as it was powerful. Ethan had been escorted out moments ago, his face a shade paler than before. It was clear that the gravity of his actions had finally hit him. The reality of losing his job, of facing the consequences of his arrogant dismissal of Sophie, had left him humbled. He walked past Sophie and Ryan, his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the floor. The embarrassment that had once been cloaked in superiority now weighed heavily on him. The silence stretched for a few moments, until Ethan hesitated at the entrance to the back office. He turned around, his face flushed with the remnants of frustration, but also something else, regret. I just want to say I'm sorry, he began, his voice shaky, his hands clasped in front of him. The words felt forced, hollow even, as if he were offering them out of obligation rather than genuine remorse. He wasn't a man accustomed to apologizing, certainly not to someone like Sophie. I didn't mean to treat you the way I did. I can see now that it was wrong. I was wrong. Sophie met his gaze for a brief moment, her expression unreadable. She heard the words, but they didn't resonate with her. Ethan's apology felt like a cheap attempt to erase what had happened, as if a few words could undo the hurt he had caused. Sophie had been through enough to know that words alone were never enough. She had been let down by them before. No, what she needed was change, and what she wanted was acknowledgement, not just from Ethan, but from everyone. She stood there, unwavering, silent. Ryan, standing beside her, felt a flicker of frustration rise in him, but he kept his voice calm. Words don't change behavior, Ethan. It's not about just saying you're sorry. It's about understanding why what you did was wrong and learning from it. And maybe you'll take that lesson with you into the future. Ethan opened his mouth to say something else, but the words never came. Instead, he lowered his gaze, knowing deep down that Ryan was right. There was no easy way out of this. Sophie had been rightfully hurt, and no apology, no matter how genuine, could undo the sting. Sophie, sensing that Ethan wasn't prepared to offer anything more meaningful, turned her attention to the young woman who had been standing in the background throughout the entire scene, Olivia. She had been the one who had shown Sophie kindness when no one else had, who had treated her with respect when Ethan had dismissed her with such cold arrogance. It was Olivia who had made Sophie feel like she wasn't invisible, like she deserved the same level of attention as anyone else in that showroom. Olivia, who had been quietly observing the exchange, now stepped forward with a slight hesitance, unsure of how to proceed. She had been doing her job, helping Sophie when she needed it most. But the recognition she had received now felt like an overwhelming shift. Ryan turned to her with a smile, his tone genuine. Olivia, thank you for your kindness yesterday. You didn't just do your job, you made a real difference. You showed Sophie what professionalism looks like when it's done right. And you treated her with the respect she deserves, when no one else would. I appreciate that. Sophie smiled softly at Olivia, her eyes full of warmth and gratitude. Thank you, Olivia, she said, her voice steady and sincere. It's people like you who make the real difference in this world, not the ones who make snap judgments based on appearances. You did the right thing, and that means more than you know. Olivia blinked, clearly taken aback by the recognition. She had expected a brief acknowledgement, maybe a word of thanks, but this was something entirely different. She had seen the way the dealership staff had treated Sophie the day before, and when no one else stepped up, she had taken it upon herself to offer help. She hadn't known what would come of it, but the impact had been far greater than she could have imagined. The gratitude in Sophie's eyes filled Olivia with a quiet sense of pride. I did what anyone should do, Olivia replied softly, a humble smile crossing her face. But thank you, really. It means a lot. The moment between the three of them was one of grace, simple, yet profound. It was a quiet recognition that real change doesn't come from empty words or hollow apologies. It comes from the actions of those who are willing to stand up and make the world a little better, a little kinder. And in this case, that change had begun with Sophie, who had stood her ground, and with Olivia, who had shown compassion when it was needed most. As Sophie and Ryan left the dealership, the tension that had lingered in the air seemed to dissipate. The power of that quiet moment, that acknowledgement, had shifted something in the atmosphere. And while the apology from Ethan may have been hollow, the true sense of justice and recognition had come from those who had acted with integrity, people like Olivia, who reminded Sophie that kindness still had a place in a world that often favored judgment. And for that, Sophie would always be grateful. The heavy door of the dealership swung closed behind Ryan and Sophie, the sound of it echoing through the now quiet space. The tension that had once filled the air, thick with judgment and uncertainty, had begun to dissipate, leaving behind an undeniable sense of calm. It was as though the weight of the past moments had been lifted, not just from Sophie's shoulders, but from the dealership itself. The staff, who had once stood frozen in place, now seemed to move with a sense of uncertainty, perhaps even guilt, as they began to understand the gravity of the lesson that had just unfolded. Ryan and Sophie stepped outside into the crisp morning air, their steps in sync as they walked toward their Bentley. Sophie's heels clicked against the pavement with a rhythm of finality, and for the first time since entering the dealership, she felt a quiet confidence settle within her. The pain from the previous day was still there, lingering in the background, but it no longer held the same weight. The injustice she had faced had been met with action, and in doing so, she had reclaimed her power, her voice, and her sense of self-worth. Ryan's hand gently brushed against hers as they walked side by side, the simple gesture a silent acknowledgement of the strength they both shared in that moment. He had always been her pillar of support, but today, Sophie had shown him something just as important. She had shown herself how capable she was of standing up for what was right, of standing up for herself. Ryan's heart swelled with pride as he glanced at her, noticing the subtle shift in her posture, how she now walked with purpose, her head held high, her shoulders squared in a way that told the world she was no longer the woman she had been the day before. As they reached the car, Ryan opened the door for Sophie, his actions steady and deliberate. She slid into the plush interior, the leather seats soft beneath her, and for a brief moment, she closed her eyes, taking in the peace that surrounded her. The soft hum of the engine as Ryan started the car was the only sound, the world outside momentarily fading away. Ryan glanced at Sophie, a small, knowing smile tugging at his lips. "You did good today," he said, his voice steady and sincere. Sophie met his gaze, her eyes shining with a quiet fire. "No, we did good," she replied, her voice full of gratitude and strength. "It wasn't just about me. It was about doing what's right." Ryan nodded, his smile widening as he shifted the car into drive. "Exactly. And it's a lesson I think everyone in that dealership will remember." As they drove away from the dealership, the once bustling showroom now receding into the distance, Sophie felt a sense of liberation she hadn't expected. It wasn't the car, the confrontation, or the victory in the moment that left her feeling empowered. It was the realization that she had stood up for herself when it mattered most. The dealership, with all its polished chrome and luxury cars, could never take that from her. The car moved smoothly down the street, its engine purring beneath them as the world outside passed by. Sophie gazed out the window, watching the familiar streets of their city unfold in front of her. The reflection of the sun on the glass was a reminder of the light that had followed them out of the dealership, an inner light that no one could dim. The tension that had once been a heavy cloak was now gone, replaced by a quiet satisfaction. She had done what needed to be done, and in doing so, she had not only proved something to Ethan and the staff at the dealership, but, more importantly, to herself. As the Bentley moved further down the road, the camera slowly zoomed out, the luxurious car becoming a symbol of more than just wealth. It became a symbol of empowerment, of standing up for what's right, and of never letting anyone define your worth based on their assumptions. The dealership was now nothing more than a distant memory, a place where judgment and assumptions had been replaced by dignity and respect. The soft sound of the engine hummed in the background, filling the silence between them as the car glided along the road. Sophie's mind wandered to the words of the day, the lessons that had been learned. She thought about how easily people could dismiss others, how often they assumed that appearance alone defined worth. She thought about Ethan and his apology, hollow though it had been, and the shift she had seen in the dealership's atmosphere. No apology could undo the hurt of the past, but the lessons learned, those would last a lifetime. A voiceover, calm and reflective, echoed softly in the background, mirroring Sophie's thoughts. Respect is not about what you see on the outside. It's not about the clothes we wear, the car we drive, or the job we have. It's about how we treat others, regardless of their status, appearance, or background. True worth is not measured by outward appearances. Respect is earned, not assumed. The words felt like a quiet truth, resonating deeply within Sophie. She had known this truth all along, but today it had become more than just a lesson. It had become a reality. She had fought for it, and in doing so, she had taken back her own voice, her own power. As the car continued down the road, the camera zoomed out further, capturing the Bentley as it became a small, sleek figure against the wide, open road. It symbolized not just their departure from the dealership, but their victory in doing what was right. The city skyline stretched out in the distance, representing endless possibilities. For Sophie, this was only the beginning. She had shown that standing up for oneself was never about arrogance or anger. It was about respect, dignity, and knowing your own worth. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more engaging content. Let us know your thoughts on the story and how it all ended. Did Ryan and Sophie handle the situation right? What do you think about Ethan's apology and Olivia's kindness? We'd love to hear your rating for the story on a scale of 1 to 10. Don't forget to drop your location in the comments and tell us where you're watching from.